So I wanted to preface this tonight with the fact that I really want to talk specifically to you all as students in this presentation, but I'm also going to be presenting to those folks who weren't able to make it here last night due to COVID. And so it's sort of a community talk and as well as something that's for you all. But I want you to ask questions along the way, and I really hope that by the end of the presentation you have a good sense for what we're doing at the Food Innovation Center in Portland, because there are opportunities for you to come do internships with us or to come participate in our taste tests where you actually get paid to give your opinion. And certainly, if nothing else, I hope that you all will come over for a tour just to see what we're doing, and I think you'd find it interesting. So really happy to be here today. And so, you know, today's talk is really focused on fresh versus frozen. And it's funny because yesterday I was getting ready to give the talk to the community, and I overheard one of your classes. There was a video, and it was talking about fresh versus frozen, and I believe it was French fries. Was anyone in that class yesterday? Okay, so what I heard is that in that program, it wasn't a speaker, it was a program, they said that, you know, fresh is always better and it's cheaper. You can go to the store and get a, you know, potato and make your own French fries for much less than you could to buy frozen French fries. Well, what that speaker did not include is the fact that that frozen is basically been processed, right? So there's a lot of cost that goes into the processing. It's not the freezing, it's the processing piece. And so I thought that wasn't a very fair comparison, because I'll show you in the research tonight that actually frozen can be a really cost-effective option, especially for seafood, which is extremely expensive. So just a roadmap to tell you what we're going to do tonight. This talk will last about 90 minutes, and in the middle we're going to actually do a sensory evaluation. So we'll break it up a little bit, and you'll be able to participate on your phone to do a taste test. But the first thing I'm going to do is tell you about sensory science, because I think it's a really good option for culinary students to think about. It's something that I found out about as a culinary student and became a sensory food scientist. And so I don't know how many of you have actually heard of sensory food science, but I certainly hadn't until I was in culinary school. And then I'll tell you specifically about the taste tests, you know, what they are, how they're useful. We'll do our black cod evaluation. And then I'll tell you about the research that we did that, you know, brought me here today. And it started back in 2016, actually. I'm going to tell you about some of the other projects that we're currently doing at the Food Innovation Center. And then I don't know if we're going to be able to review your results because we just have frozen product to taste tonight. But we can still look and talk about, you know, what y'all thought. So how many of you have actually heard of the Food Innovation Center? Yeah, actually not many people have. We've been around for 20 years now. We're right in the Pearl District in downtown Portland. And it's basically a center that was put together by the Department of Agriculture and Oregon State University to try and help Northwest food companies become more competitive, both domestically and internationally. And so we've got 12 experiment stations around the state. You know, there's actually one here in Central Oregon, and all of them are dealing with the crops that are local to that part of the state. So there's, you know, one in Astoria that's dealing with seafood, and, you know, there's some in Hood River that are dealing with pears, apples, cherries. The one in Portland, we were there to basically help people with marketing, sensory evaluation, product development, shelf life testing, and that, you know, type of work, so that these companies had the resources that they needed to really launch successful products. And so this is very unique across the country. And we were, I think, the second Food Innovation Center. If you Google it now, almost every university that's an ag school has one, and they've all toured. They've come to Portland to tour our center because it's really been great for our food companies and our entrepreneurs. And so the services that we provide, as I just mentioned, you know, we have the product development team. And so that's something where culinary students, you could really go into product development for any food company, really. And I will tell you, having come out of culinary school myself, that I felt like I had a much better base of knowledge about what good food is than anybody else in my food science program. I was actually shocked at, and I'll tell you guys, so you guys know Martin Yan, of course. He was a UC Davis grad, and he actually came back when I was at Davis, and they did a competition, sort of a, oh gosh, what's the show called where you walk in and you don't know what the ingredients are, they're all in a bag and you have to make something. Yeah, exactly. And so I had just finished my culinary school. I was just back from France, and I remember that something that I had made in culinary school was this, and something that's, something they do in France is they make like a layered pancake, and so each layer has a different flavor. And so I took from my bag all the different ingredients and I made different layers, and then you cut it into wedges. And Martin Yan was actually the person who was the judge, and my team won. And I looked at the other teams and what they were able to put together, and they were very good on the scientific side, but they didn't have the culinary side, the understanding, the innovation. And so I'm just saying, as students with this background, it's something to consider, because you guys will have very unique talents and knowledge that most food scientists don't have, and I think that they should, because I think that marrying the food with the science is really important. So anyways, just to put that out there. So our product development team does include one chef who's a culinologist, which means that he has both the culinary and the food science background. We have food safety people who are, ever more important, obviously, because of FSMA and how important that is, those regulatory issues these days. My program, sensory and consumer testing, and then the market research, which is huge, obviously. We put a lot of money into market research. So this is just a picture of our product development, one of our product developers. We were actually over in Japan when this picture was taken. We were doing a trade mission with the governor. And what we were doing was bringing a lot of our food companies and ingredients to Japan to highlight what we have to offer in Oregon, to try and lure Japanese companies to come over to Oregon and either use our agriculture or set up companies here that would then use the food ingredients that we have here in Oregon. And so, again, just something that's really interesting and cool to be able to do as a product developer. But they also do, ingredient sourcing, ingredient substitutions, new formulations, nutrition labeling, product ideation, all of those things. And then we also do analytical packaging and shelf life testing. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the Laird Superfoods brand. They got their start here in Central Oregon in Sisters. And we've been doing shelf life testing for them for years now, and it's really neat to see them, starting as a very small company and really expanding and becoming so successful. And then finally, my program, which is all about testing consumers and consumer acceptability. So you guys are probably too young, but have you guys heard of the Coke Pepsi Challenge? I know. Yeah. So when I was, school age, I went to the Oregon State Fair, and they had a booth, and it was like one of the cups had Coke in it, one had Pepsi in it. They were blind coded. You taste them both, and you tell them which one you prefer. And this was actually sponsored by Coke. But do you know who the winner was? It was Pepsi. And does anybody know why? No, Pepsi's sweeter. And so people, even though people who maybe thought that they were, fans of Coke, or someone like me who doesn't really drink pop, but I tasted them both, more people liked Pepsi than Coke. And so it was a big failure for Coke, who was the one that sponsored this. And they ended up going into, making some decisions that they had to step back from. But that's like one of those classic sensory tests. And so the fresh versus frozen follows on the footsteps of that, because when you put samples in front of somebody and you don't have any branding associated with them, all of those perceptions of the branding go away, and our true acceptability measures come out, and we rate those in a way that's more honest. And so to be honest with you, I do this a lot with other foods. I take multiple brands home, and I'll do blind tastes at home, and I realize there are a lot of brands out there that I actually prefer when I have them side by side than the one I've been buying. So in grad school at UC Davis, we did a test with peanut butter, and I had always thought that I was a fan of Skippy peanut butter. Well, it turns out I like Jif better. So, I mean, it's just, you can do it with any product. It's pretty interesting. But that's what we do, and we do it with consumers, and we pay them to come in and do this research with us. And so sensory science is a science of the senses. And so we are using scientific methods to measure all 5 senses. And I started in biochemistry, went to culinary school, found out about sensory, and then became a sensory scientist because I think it's fascinating work. And so, when we go to buy a product, the first thing we do is we look at it, right? We see, is this appealing? Is this something I actually want to buy and eat? The second thing we might do is actually smell it. And if it smells appealing, great. But if it doesn't, we probably won't want to eat it. Of course, it needs to taste good. In every test that I run, the #1 reason that people buy a product is that it tastes good. If it doesn't taste good, forget about the sustainability, forget about the cost, forget about everything else. People are not going to buy it again. I was telling the group last night that it has to sound right. There's a study that half the room actually had noise-canceling headphones on. The other half of the room did not. They both ate the same potato chips, and the people without the headphones liked them better because of the sound. So we have expectations of how things are going to sound when we eat them. And then finally, the texture, right? The touch, the feeling, it has to be good. And unfortunately, you guys are not going to be able to compare the texture of the 2 fish tonight, but what we have found over and over is the texture of frozen is actually preferred to fresh because it really keeps its shape and firmness that you lose over time when you have fresh fish. So this is what our sensory booth would look like if you came to the Food Innovation Center. And again, sensory is a real science. It's not just about throwing a bunch of samples out and having people come and taste them. We actually blind code all the samples so that they don't have any bias of marketing. We put people in individual booths so that they can't talk to each other. I mean, I'm sure that if your chef were to say, I want you all to come over and taste this, this is really high quality, what do you think? More of you would be swayed into thinking like, yeah, well, if she's telling us it's high quality, it probably is. If she told you it was really low quality, you might start to think that way. Well, we don't want to have any of that bias put into the evaluations. So we make people sit in their own booth. And then we actually randomize the presentation order of the products. And so, again, if you were going to taste the 2 products tonight, half of you would be tasting the fresh first, and half of you would taste the frozen first, because we don't want the order to influence your perception of the product. If you're really hungry, you might give that first product you try a higher rating than the second one. So we randomize everything. And the reason sensory is so important, and you guys probably know this already, is that 80 to 90% of all new food products fail within 1 year of introduction. The market is extremely competitive. And so if you don't have consumer research to back your product launch, there's a good chance you're going to fail. So it really makes sense to put in that time, energy, and to pay for the research ahead of time so that you really go into the market knowing who your consumer is and what they want and what unmet need you are giving the consumer, essentially. Okay, I want you guys to take a look at this, and then I want you to tell me what was the brand of detergent that was blue? Can anyone tell me that? Very good. I'm impressed. How about the white one? How about green? Yep. And how about yellow? Yep. And what about the orange? Yeah. So what we have found as sensory scientists is that people can associate colors and shapes much better than they can brands. And so being able to show you all that without giving you any brand information, somebody in the room was able to tell me the brand of every single one of those. And it's so important that companies actually will put trademarks on certain colors. And so Cadbury won a trademark suit against Nestle, where they were able to keep that purple color only for their chocolate because people associate Cadbury with the purple. I was telling them last night that Harley-Davidson has actually trademarked the sound of their motorcycle, so no one else can use that sound for the motorcycle. Play-Doh has a trademark on their smell. It's just these companies know that if they can get brand loyalty from people and that we associate every single time that the orange is going to be tied, it's something we're familiar with, and we will maybe pick it up again. So it's pretty interesting. We go all around the state and actually all over the world to do our sensory research. We've done it here in Bend. We were at your farmer's market to do that raw milk versus pasteurized milk cheese research about 12 years ago. But we also go to football games and grocery stores and places like this, culinary school or community events, because we're always looking for those people who are users and likers of the product that we test. We would never want to ask somebody to come in to taste raw oysters who didn't like seafood, right? So we go all over to make sure that we're finding the right people. And then we're always looking at purchase intent. If the people like it, great, but are they going to buy it? Everybody likes, well, most people like desserts, but are they actually going to go out and buy them? Maybe not. We have reasons for what we buy, and so making sure that people are actually interested in buying a product is really important. And then finally, we're almost ready to start our taste test, but I wanted to tell you, we also actually train people as instruments. So we might get a trained panel of 8 to 12 people who are red wine drinkers, and over a couple months' time, we would pay them to come in and taste wine so that every time that they tasted a certain wine, they could say, that wine has blackberry in it, or that wine tastes like bell pepper, and give us an intensity level of what that attribute is in a wine, because we can link that data to the wine that consumers like and say, oh, consumers really like blackberry, we should make more like this. And so there are techniques that we use to do that as well. And actually, I was telling everyone last night, if you ever go to the Smithsonian, to Julia Child's kitchen, has anybody been there to see that? It's very cool. They've basically taken her kitchen and recreated it in the Smithsonian, all of her pots and pans and everything else. Right next to it, there's an exhibit on UC Davis in agriculture, and my professor, my major professor at UC Davis, is the one that created the wine aroma wheel. And it's something now that's used all over the world to help describe wines, so it's pretty neat. This is a Pinot Noir test that we did at the Food Innovation Center a couple years ago, and you can see the ad there says, want to get paid $350. So people were paid $350 to come in 3 consecutive days and taste several glasses of wine. And this company was so interested in getting consumer feedback that they were willing to pay 100 people $350 a piece to get their feedback on Pinot Noir. In that test, we asked people, if these wines were equally priced, which bottle would you select? And I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when you go to the store and you're looking at a category like wine or beer or kombucha or whatever it is, and there's so many things on the store shelf, how do you make your decision? Price and taste, label. Anything else that goes into your purchase decisions? Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I think especially with wine, when you look at all of those different labels, even I feel like I know quite a bit about wine, but when I go to the store, I'm looking for something I'm familiar with, and I'm looking at, expert ratings. Is somebody given this, over 90 points, for example? Because otherwise, it's just, they've flooded the market. We also look at ad boards, and we say, okay, is the one showing people having fun more compelling than the one with food, or the one that's showing a beautiful place, or the big bright yellow colors? Like, what is going to catch people's attention? And then we've also shown pictures at the beginning of a test and then had them taste wine, and at the end of the test asked them, which one did you remember? And if they can't remember any of that, probably it's not very compelling advertising. So we've got about 40,000 people in our database at the Food Innovation Center, people that are interested in coming in to participate and take these types of tests. And we do this kind of research for large companies from, all over the country, but especially here in the Northwest. We also do this testing on footwear. So obviously Portland is sort of the mecca for footwear. We've got Nike, we've got Adidas, we've got Under Armour, we've got Keen. There's several footwear companies, and so we have basketball players come in to try on shoes. We had runners come in to try on running shoes. We go into running stores and actually put a shoe on the shelf that doesn't exist in the marketplace and look to see if anybody comes over to pick it up. And if they do, we go over and ask them, what was compelling about this shoe? Why did you come over to look at it? And that helps with the marketing. And then this is a slide just to show some of our clients that we've worked with over the past couple years. And you can see a lot of the big Northwest companies are represented there. We've also done work with Impossible Foods. I don't know if you guys have tried the Impossible Burger, but we've been testing with them since 2015. And they've really evolved their product using consumer testing over the years. Can anybody tell me what the salad-like thing in the middle there is? Yes, very good. So if you guys Google dulse, bacon that tastes like seaweed, or sorry, yes, no, seaweed that tastes like bacon, this will come up. And it's a product that OSU developed. They're growing it in tanks off the Oregon coast. And we've tested it with consumers as well. Okay, so our next slide is going to be the slide about taking the actual sensory evaluation, but I want to set it up so that you guys know what the research is about. So back in 2016, we got a grant with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to look at frozen seafood, to see if people had any interest in purchasing it, to see if it was any different than fresh, and to see if there was, if one was preferred over the other. And so we worked with several different seafood companies up and down the West Coast, from Alaska to California, to source the seafood for these tests, and then had a huge team of people that helped on the day of getting, just like you guys did last night, or whoever was here to help with that, get all of those samples ready and served to consumers. And so basically, what we're going to do is, if you guys can, and this is an actual picture of black cod. This is the Nobu Recipe, which is a delicious recipe. It's the miso crusted. If you ever have a chance, I highly recommend it. We're not going to do that today because I want you guys to focus on the inherent qualities of this seafood. And so I really want you to be evaluating, the texture, the flavor, the moisture content, how soft or firm it is, the appearance, and it's harder to do that when we have a preparation like that. So I think that the chef is literally just going to salt these lightly, and that's all you're going to get. But I'm very interested in your opinion. So go ahead and pull out your phone. You're going to scan that QR code and bring up a survey. And then once I think if we want to grab those samples, we can get started. But do you guys have any questions so far? Can we grab our phone? Please get your phone, yeah, if you don't have it, yeah. And you should be able to just bring up the photo as if you're taking a picture and just hover it over the QR code, and it should bring that survey right up. So you all will see that there's going to be a section that's got questions about sample. The second sample, you can just click through those, but then there's going to be 2 questions at the end, and one of them will ask you to read this informational sheet. So I'd love to have you click through to get to that portion of the survey as well. All right, you guys, I think I'll go ahead and start up again. So hopefully you all were able to get to the end of the survey. Again, I'm sorry that you didn't have 2 samples, but it's similar to what we did with consumers. And so, again, I've actually done this work with almost 10 different species now. But the first 2 that we had to work with were black cod and coho salmon. And the black cod is interesting. I was telling people last night, my uncle is a commercial fisherman up in Alaska. He's been doing it for a long time. And he tells me that fishermen who really know their fish prize black cod because of the really high fat content. And it freezes beautifully. And so it was a really great high value species that we were able to use for this research. And also, you can get it right off the coast of Oregon, which is great. And so we wanted to know if consumers could tell a difference between the fresh and the frozen, because technically, if they can't tell a difference, they don't have a preference, right? So once we established that they could tell a difference, then we actually asked preference to see which one they preferred. So we had consumers come into the little booths at the Food Innovation Center. We had 38 people do the difference testing, and then 108 do the acceptability testing. We made sure that these people that came in had been pre-screened to be users and likers of seafood. And then we gave them $40 for their time and their opinions. And so here we are sort of behind the scenes serving up the different samples. And the first tray, the first thing we did was the difference testing. I'll tell you how we did that, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about the fish first. So you all got same process. We actually got the frozen fillets from our partners, one of them being Port Orford Sustainable Seafood, who actually, that's the fish that you all just tried, down in Port Orford, Oregon. The fresh fish was purchased in a high-end grocery store in Portland the morning of the test. So it's what the average consumer would be able to get if they were shopping for fish that day. We skinned and filleted and portioned the fish into about 1.5 to 2 ounce portions, and then we baked them for 3 to 4 minutes until we had an internal temperature of 145. We actually didn't add any seasoning for our consumer test. I think you guys had maybe a little bit of light salt on yours. And then we actually did an analytical measurement on the fish, which is really interesting. And so there is a instrument called a certified quality reader that was developed by a company out of Sitka, Alaska, by Seafood Analytics. And what it does is it actually sends a current through fish that's never been frozen to see approximately how old it is, how many days it's been since it was actually caught. And so the way that this works is when the a fish has just been killed, the cells are going to be really close together. And they will have been in a growth phase, and so it's actually really hard for that current to go through the meat because the cells are so close. But as the fish starts to decay and it's been older and older, those cells start to break, and so the current is able to go through much more quickly. And so what's developed is sort of a curve over time, and so you can see that the days are across the bottom, and on day 0 we would expect a very high certified quality reader number because it's very hard to get that current through the cells. But as the fish gets older and starts to decay, the current is able to go through much more easily, and we would get a very low reading down at day 15 or day 20. Well, the fish that we had for this particular test, we measured the frozen just prior to it being frozen, so it was either a day or 2 old, and it had a very high number. But the fish that we purchased from the grocery store actually had numbers that were closer to 14 and 15 days old, which was shocking to us because it's fresh fish, right? We're getting it the morning of, and we would expect it to be very fresh. But when you think about the distribution chain, the fisherman has to catch the fish at sea. The fish has to make it to the dock, and then it starts to go through the processing phase. Then it has to go through distribution. Then it gets to the retailer. The retailer then has it in the case for many days sometimes before it's actually purchased and brought home by the consumer, who doesn't necessarily bake it on that day, right? Sometimes we hold it for a day or two before we actually use it. That fish can be very old over all of that, distribution. And so the frozen, however, if you're freezing it at sea or just when it gets to the land, you're basically locking in the freshness right there, and you use it whenever you want to, right? We slack it out overnight and it's ready to go the next day. So this just shows you sort of the days on ice that we approximated. The frozen was probably, 2 days on ice, whereas the fresh was closer to 14 or 15. The shelf life of the frozen is much, much higher than it was for the fresh that we tested. And so we had, again, black cod and salmon, and we did what's called a triangle test. And that's just where you have 3, and very similar to what you guys just tasted, 3 dishes, blind coded. It didn't say frozen, frozen, fresh. That's what I put on the slide. But blind coded, and consumers were asked to taste all 3 and then tell us which one was the different sample. They didn't even know that some were fresh and some were frozen. They just knew that one was different, and they had to tell us which one it was. And we found out, so we did this with both the cod and the coho, and we actually found out that consumers could tell a real difference. There's a real difference between fresh and frozen. And so then we were able to go on to our acceptability testing. And I'm not going to show you every result that we took, but I just want to show you that when you look at the 2 salmon, the frozen and the frozen actually scored much higher in this attribute, which is appearance, and the 2 cod samples were at parity, so they were liked equally. For the overall liking, which is a very important question, and you guys answered it, we actually found that our frozen black cod was significantly rated higher than the fresh. So people told us the frozen was of much higher quality and they liked it better. The salmon was at parity, which is a great thing because most people will tell you that fresh is better than frozen, but we're showing you in our blind studies that they were actually rated equally in this particular test. And so over all of those attributes that you guys just answered, with the black cod, every single one was preferred. The frozen was preferred in every attribute. And the salmon, the frozen was actually preferred in several attributes and then rated equally for some of the others. So it was just as good. We did this with chefs, actually, from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Sustainability Council from all over the United States. And it was also a blind test. They didn't know which one was which. We only had 19 chefs. But you can see here the frozen, again, scored higher than the fresh, and they were shocked. They were really shocked by that because these are chefs, very high-end chefs. I'm sure you would probably know many of their names, and they're almost always cooking with fresh. And so when you put a blind test in front of people, you never know. So we gave them this sheet, the same one that you all just read, and then we asked them several other questions. And I think a lot of consumers don't realize that the benefits of frozen seafood. So obviously one of them is the sushi grade quality. And we saw that yesterday in the sample that you all had. There's a reason that we freeze our fish for sushi, right? The parasites, right? Economic benefits of frozen. We are able to support small scale fishermen. If we know where we're buying, who is fishing, supplying our seafood, we can actually support those families specifically. The environmental benefits are huge because we're not flying fish across the country to keep it in its fresh state. We can actually take it by rail, by truck, by boat, which is much, much less expensive and better for the environment than flying anything. And of course, the increased shelf life, right? We can store it for as long as we want. Right now, we're doing a shelf life study. We have funding from NOAA to do shelf life of 18 months to see at what point does seafood start to deteriorate. So we just did our first test. We're on month 3 right now. And we'll be doing this for another 18 months, and I'll report back when we find the results to that study. So there's many reasons to support frozen. And then finally, this is the last question that you guys answered, and I'd be very interested to hear your opinion, but what most consumers told us is that they like to support the idea of frozen after reading the sheet because it's supporting sustainability and smaller scale local fishermen, in addition to the fact that, you know, there's all the other reasons we discussed. So I wanted to show you guys, these are the results from last night. I tabulated them. And so the column on the right with the red and the bold, that was the frozen, and the fresh is on the left. And every single attribute we tested, the frozen was preferred yesterday, every single one. That's pretty interesting. We replicate this every time we do it with every species we've tested. But so this is just a picture. So I was telling people last night that because of COVID, and you guys all know this, the seafood supply chain was basically halted, right? Because most of the seafood is going into restaurants, and restaurants were closed, and fishermen had no place to sell their product. So what a lot of them ended up doing is taking it to this model, which has been very, very successful for them. It's called instead of a CSA, it's a CSF, so community supported fishery. And basically what people can do now is they can subscribe to a monthly box that they get in the mail of frozen seafood. Or you can make a one-time purchase. But you are purchasing directly from the fishermen. And so you know, the one up in the top left, those are the folks that supplied the fish we ate today, Port Orford Sustainable Seafood. There are two that are really great out of Alaska. The one down in the left or the right lower corner, Trayfin, they're out of Washington. They have excellent albacore. So I recommend you guys check them out because they also make a great gift. I actually use this seafood gift box for many, many people over the years. But I want to also mention, so you can see the pouch tuna there. I don't know if you guys buy canned tuna, pouch tuna, but when you buy canned tuna, more likely than not, it's actually been processed twice. So it has to be processed first to get it sort of into the, you know, block that it's in, and then it has to be processed again once it goes into a can. And each time that happens, they actually squeeze out all the juice, and when the juice is squeezed out, all the omega-3s leave with it. So you are losing all of the amazing benefits of buying tuna when you buy it in a can. Pouched tuna, on the other hand, is only processed once. And so you are getting all of those juices to stay in, and I would just highly recommend, if you can find it in the market, to give it a try. Do a taste test. I do this with my family, where you set a blind taste test and see which one you prefer. But give it a try. I recommend it. So this study literally just came out on October 1st, so about a week ago. And what it's showing is that consumers are actually opening up to the idea of frozen products. So it says that in head-to-head comparisons, between 40 to 50% of consumers now see frozen food as just as good or better than fresh. And frozen food sales have jumped 21% in 2020. And so, you know, the first category is vegetables, and then meat, and then fruits and berries and frozen seafood. The age range 18 to 34 are, you know, almost 50% or more saying that they consider frozen seafood to be a really great option. So it's growing. It's really growing, and people are opening up to the option in lots of different categories. So we took the model of the frozen seafood and we actually replicated it with vegetables. And so we did a project with the Oregon Processed Vegetable Commission with broccoli. And our broccoli test, fresh versus frozen, actually found that people thought both were above average in quality, and the purchase intent, they were willing to purchase both. And so again, you know, when you think of berries and vegetables, we have such amazing products in Oregon. We're so lucky to live here. I mean, I personally think it's some of the best in the United States. And if we can take what we get in the summer, freeze it, and then use it throughout the year, we would support local and really high quality. And I think that especially frozen fruit can be just outstanding year-round. So something to consider. I had a little gift for people who answered this correctly last night, and I don't have that for you guys, but I'd love to know if anybody knows the answer. Can anybody tell me how to know when a pear is ripe? I didn't know for a long time, yeah. Yeah, what do you do? Yeah, and what happens? That's exactly right. Most people do not know that. So basically, for the audience, I want to repeat that. The way that you tell a pear is ripe is you take a pear, and on the stem end, it's called check the neck. If there's a depression when you hit into the stem, that's when you know. You do not wait for the fat part, because if you do, pears ripen from the inside out, it's going to be mushy. It's overripe if you wait that long. So you find out on the stem end, if the stem starts to give a little bit, the flesh right at the stem, that's when to eat it. And if you're not ready to eat it, put it in the refrigerator. It'll keep for a week or more, and it's outstanding. And unfortunately, consumers don't know this, and so they bring a pear home, they put it on the counter, they wait until it's mushy on the outside, soft on the outside, and then they think, oh, this is mealy, I don't want this pear, I don't like pears, I'm not going to buy pears again. And our pear farmers are really suffering because of it. They are pulling out pear trees in Oregon left and right because people are not buying pears. And so I have taken it on as my mission to try and educate people on how to tell when a pear is ripe, because pears, I think, are some of the best fruit out there, and there's a huge variety of them. So we actually went down to Mexico City just before COVID hit and did some taste tests with consumers in Walmart, actually, Walmart stores, to look and see what they preferred, which varieties they prefer, because Mexico is one of our top export markets. And people came up to us and said, what variety pear is this? I've never had a pear so good. It was the variety that was sitting right in their grocery store, but they didn't know how to ripen it. And so, again, and you guys are chefs, educating people about produce, high quality produce, how to serve it well, how to know when it's ripe, I think it's just, it's a great thing to do. When we asked people in Mexico, why are they buying pears? A lot of the reason, besides taste, because we know that's most important, is because of nutrition. And so having that information to market to people on the high nutrition and the great taste is valuable for the pear growers. Okay, we are close to the end, you guys. I'm just going to tell you about 2 more studies. So this one I'll be doing with people in about 3 weeks. This is about willingness to pay. So a lot of people say, well, you can ask people about their opinions, and they might tell you, like you guys did, that, yeah, I might purchase this, but you get them into a store, and they're not actually going to do it. You don't actually know if they like the product or not. Well, this time we're actually going to have people in an auction, and we're going to give them fruit, apples of different quality. We're going to give them $55, and we're going to say, with this money, would you like to buy an apple of the quality that you just tasted? And so we'll actually allow them to purchase apples, a bag of apples to take home, and we'll be able to say, yeah, this apple is so good that these people actually wanted to buy it and take it home with them. So it's a new method that we're trying, and we think it's going to be pretty interesting. And then finally, this is a study that we did, we're just wrapping it up right now with the CDC. It's a grant from the CDC with the Oregon Department of Education, Department of Corrections, and Oregon State Hospitals. And basically, all of these people are trying to reduce sodium in foods because it is a leading problem, health issue in the United States. They're talking about if we could reduce sodium intake by 1,200 milligrams per person annually, we could save up to $20 billion in health care and prevent 81,000 deaths annually in the United States. So it's an important issue. And so we were trying to tackle how could we possibly reduce sodium in the American diet. Does anybody know the leading cause of sodium in the American diet?
I saw bread.
Yeah, it's bread. It's bread, which is hard for me to believe. I couldn't believe it when I first started this research. The reason it's bread is because we eat so much bread. And so when you look at over the year how much bread we eat compared to all the things that you guys mentioned, we eat enough bread that it's the leading cause of sodium in our diet. So we actually took to task trying to change the bread. And I went around the state of Oregon to a lot of different communities and worked with 3rd graders all the way up to 12th graders and did all the same taste tests that you guys just did, triangle tests with bread of different sodium levels. And what we found is that these kids actually liked bread with up to 30% sodium reduction. Does anybody know why? What happens when you reduce sodium in a product, or at least in bread? Yes, very good. That's exactly right. It tastes sweeter. So you're not sort of hiding that sweetness, the sugar. And kids actually preferred it. So we've been trying to work with Franz and other companies who are making bread for our hospitals, for our prisons, for our schools, to try and change their formulations to reduce the sodium. And we think it's going to make a huge difference in people's health. And so, again, as a chef, I know that we all have the ability to add more salt as seasoning, but it's something that we should always, take into, although I do love my salt, and I think it's an important part of seasoning for any food. We actually send boxes home with people to do what we call in-home use tests. So we did a breakfast sandwich study where we sent several sandwiches that you can find in the freezer at the store home and had people rate them at home. That's how we've gotten around the COVID issue. We've also done this with tea, and we're doing an interesting study with tea right now where we're looking at the different, making tea with different sort of flavoring to see what people like. And then finally, I did some research with craft beer, with IPA recently, and again, you look at the shelf and it's sort of overwhelming, the number of brands that we see out there. But we wanted to know if consumers saw, so we gave them, in the top right-hand corner, you can see that's our little experimental shelf that people actually saw on the computer. We gave them several different scenarios, one that had just a few and one that had a lot more and several in between. And we wanted to know how satisfied they were. Can you guys guess what happened? I mean, what would you think? Would you like to see more choice, or do you guys get overwhelmed, or more choice? Well, that's what they said too. They actually, they said that they like to have more choice. But some people do find it overwhelming to have so many things on the store shelf. But anyway, so because we only had one product, I don't know that we really have any results to look at. But do you guys have anything to say about the process, the sensory evaluation, and what you thought of the fish in general? Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we had a lot of comments from our test last night about the texture. For both of you were talking about texture. And I think that was one of the #1 drivers of the preference that we saw last night, was texture. I also wanted to mention, I'll put on my thank you slide here, that you all are welcome to come over and take a tour of the Food Innovation Center, meet some of our product development team. Certainly you could participate in one of our taste tests to see what that's like. But if you're interested in doing an internship, feel free to contact me. And I just, again, want you to think about this, not that, going out and working in a restaurant or whatever you're thinking about doing is all fantastic, but this is another option to consider, and maybe you consider it after working in a restaurant for several years and decide that you have some creative talent that you want to put towards putting products together and marketing them. So this is just another option to consider. And I want to thank all of the team for everything that went into this project. We've been working on it, as Charlotte said, for 2 years, trying to get this presentation together, and then COVID hit and several other factors, but I'm really glad that I could be here, and it was just a great team to work with. So yeah, do you guys have any questions? All right, well, I think that's it.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ann.
Yeah, absolutely.